My name is Archie, and today we're going to talk about the intersection of migrants and design. I prefer the conversation today to be a little more of a conversation and less of me just blarbing at y'all. So if at any time, if you want to stop the conversation to pose a question or come up or tell me, or I guess teach everyone something, or anything really that violently affected you in today's conversation, please feel free to do so. Again, the space is open because the conversation we're having today is going to be very deep. It is deep to me, and I am hoping that it reflects that way for y'all as well. So if at any moment there are that emotions or anything do come up, please feel free to share it with everyone. I want to ensure that this is a safe space moving forward. Cool. So today my goal and work. Today my goal is to, there we go, to ensure that we're going to talk about takeaways, right? To bring awareness to the existence of migrant communities. Yes, we all know that they do exist. Yes, we all know that they're part of life, so on and so forth. But this is to know what migrants do for you and how you as a designer can include them in your own process / outcome. Another part of all of that is that I think is important is first and foremost to become an ally, to then be able to include this in your own design. So that will also be a takeaway for you, is how can you learn to be an ally? And it might be simple things and it might be things that you've already heard of, but this is just me condensing it into a tiny screen, into tiny, tiny little words to make it better for everyone. So why do I have the authority to talk about it? Long story short, this is an acquired accent. My name is Archie. I am a UX researcher at Capgemini. I host a podcast called I'm Not From Here, and also I'm a global citizen. So the reason I say this is not really my accent is because I was born in India and I know Indian culture as a part of my life. I grew up in Oman, and in Oman, we were a heavy part of the Indian community there. And then I moved to the US and I picked up the accent to be more in, I guess, a part of the community, a part of what the new world is going to offer me. And right now I'm in the UK. So these are all just examples of where I've been without being cheeky and cheesy. This is kind of how I put it out there. As a migrant, I'm bringing all my perspectives together and putting it down onto a piece of paper or onto this presentation to explain how I've used it as a part of my own design life and also a part of my own community. Why does that happen? Is it just me? Let's try. Maybe play. Okay. So we're going to start with defining what a migrant is. The official definition in the dictionary says a person who moves from one place to another, especially in order to find work or better living conditions. And on the right, you will see that these are some other definitions of a migrant as stated by the UK government. UN definition is at least 1 year away from where? Enter in order to settle, okay, immigrant, subject to immigration control. Foreign born, what does that mean? Am I now a resident? Foreign nationals, what does that entail? They are not interchangeable. None of these statements are interchangeable. Everything has a meaning of its own when it comes to the government. And it is also very explicitly stated. So when you start filling forms, you will immediately understand ethnicity and where you were born, and all of those things technically should relate, but they don't sometimes. And people have that issue. And it is part of an identity issue as well when you start breaking it down into those individual pieces. Now, I don't think any of these definitions are very accurate, right? I personally want to break this definition down into the multiple aspects of it. Now, if I'm looking at the term migrant itself, there's so many freaking connotations to it, just not one, so many different meanings to it. I cannot identify as a migrant. I don't, but I do identify as a global citizen partly because I've lived in multiple locations. That's just a personal example. There might be multiple other people who identify differently. The government states that you have to identify by so-and-so, but you don't always feel that way. And therein lies the difference as well. It is a part of an identity. So some of the other words that you could use is nomad, global citizen, immigrant, expat, non-resident. Oh, my personal favorite, alien. That is still a thing. To make you feel other, yeah, that word is still used, alien and refugee. Now, if you look at these individual pieces, right, like they all have different purposes for moving. Now, what I'm going to show you next is that with the intention, let's just skip over to the next slide because I feel like it. Yeah, so each of them have different reasons for moving. And when you look at that, you can see that I moved for more opportunities, but I have spoken to a peer, and she's a VFX artist out in LA. She's a Muslim Indian. She told me she moved for freedom. And I didn't understand what that meant because I've never lived in India to know otherwise, to be other in her own country. And she moved, and India is a pretty big, decent country. It's not that it doesn't have there are no political issues of note or massively, but it's still a problem. Freedom was why she moved. A part of the entire conversation, we're also coming to, like, now, at least since the pandemic, the conversation or the reasons have been for social media, which is a terrible reason. There is a cool factor to moving to Europe, to the one European on the call, I apologize. And there's a cool factor to moving to more, I guess, cultural communities and showcasing that on your social media. It does happen. And sadly, it's not included in this statement. Now, the other thing that's not included in this definition is the geographical boundaries. There is a difference. Now, I can move from Atlanta to Jersey, which I have. I still wouldn't be considered a migrant. I'm just moving within the country. So I think there is a clear distinction of moving between countries that needs to be made. So just going away from, taking away the three aspects, right? Like, how would you redefine it? Now, I went for something that was a little more vague. Is a person who moves from one country to another to learn, to work, or to live a life of their choosing. It's hard to encompass so many different aspects of a migrant into this. And this is a struggle I have as well, is I still cannot fully get behind this definition, but this is the closest I've come to where I feel like it's right. Like, this is obviously always evolving from my perspective. Now, migration is not new. It's been happening for years and years and years. Previously, it was done when we first started, actually, migration was done because of climate. And now it's because of wars and worse disasters, which isn't the greatest. Recently, Tokyo just had an earthquake, or Japan just had a really high earthquake, and that is an earthquake prone zone. And now there is tsunami disasters or warnings that are come out because of that. That is a massive factor of why people have moved away from coastal regions, or why they're even shoring coastal regions more because of that. So some further issues to consider, that 200 years ago, we're kind of reverting back. If you look at the cyclical reasons of why we are moving, it's almost a similar pattern of climate, war, and the sad part, the new thing that's come in, is disasters. In total, this was published in 2020. There are about 281 million migrants in the world, and that's massive. 4% of the global population is massive. And still, Europe has the highest, or sees the highest number of migrants. America is next, but this statistic is not small. And how are we not accommodating for 4% of the world's populations? Or how are we not considering them, or treating them as aliens, or treating them differently, not including them in designs? Because that number is not small. That is a good amount of money that every company is throwing away. Now we're going to talk about what migrants bring to the table. I mean, first and foremost, let's just put it out there: food. Like Tex-Mex, or like the availability of multi-cuisine and cultures within your purview is a big deal. That's not owned by any small person. It's owned by an immigrant or a migrant that moved over here and is sharing part of their culture. Music, that's a big giving. Like a lot of, I guess, I don't want to use those words just because it might be rude, but a lot of music stems from different cultures and has become now part of pop mainstream media, I guess. I recently was listening to a song which had like a Tamil music note, or I guess some words in it, and it was a rap song. I was like, how is this so far from each other, but it sounds amazing? And art, of course, it forces new perspectives. It's bringing to light different perspectives, and so on and so forth. But what people don't see, those are like obvious impacts, right? What people don't see is the population impact. In 2010 to 2020 was the slowest growing population. Like it slowed down the growth significantly. And it's, we're not seeing a lot of births or kids being born anymore. And if the US has to stay competitive globally, so they have to double immigration levels just so they can have more people do jobs. And also increasing the number, like with more people retiring, there is a labor demand in addition to that. So apart from not giving birth, and also more retirees or old people, we're now at a shortage of labor. So without immigration to fulfill that, we're at a loss here. Interesting statistic is that 200,000 DACA recipients are serving on the front line of the pandemic. And that's like 40,000 healthcare workers, including 40,000 healthcare workers. That's huge. And that's all migrants and immigrants that have come in and doing those jobs that are not spoken about. We look at pop culture and think that that's the end goal. The reality is this is where the work is being done in the background, underlying. apart from that, there is a huge economic impact. And I'm going to show you like a upcoming statistic that's going to blow your mind. But for now, let's just say increasing the number of people in the country for a consumer economy increases spending power, period. 45% of companies are basically created by immigrants or children of immigrants. And finally, the biggest thing, taxes. Now, this is specific to the US. Immigrants added 2 trillion to the US GDP in 2016 and paid 458 billion in taxes in 2018. That is not a small amount. And that is where we add a lot of value. All I'm saying to conclude all of that is we're not just a piece of paper. And that is currently how the government treats us. We're not just a piece of paper, but we add more value. Imagine now what we can do for your team, your product, or anything, right? We've already added so much into daily life and society. What can we bring more? Now, this is a term that I want to copyright and claim is POC. When people say people of color, I believe it should be called pocket of culture. I want that to be a shirt that says that. So if anyone wants to make it and give it to me as a gift, my birthday is coming in November, just a heads up. So yeah, and I think that's an added benefit. There is an added benefit of new perspective, cultural mindsets, and just, I guess part of it is the hustle, the ability to keep moving and keep finding solutions, being resourceful. That's the mindset you will get to a team, which I think is a very big added value. We always are asked to do so much more with very little. And I guess this is a way to say having that mindset already helps you out. So in order to be an ally, there are a couple of things that I think are very important. First is recognizing the many dimensions of diversity. So on this chart, I don't know if y'all have ever seen this, but I think it's brilliant to have the conversation of diversity. By ignoring it, we're excluding it. All I'm saying is recognize geography as a massive dimension as well. On here, what we primarily talk about is the internal dimensions. So age, race, gender, ethnicity, physical ability, sexual orientation, religion. Religion technically constitutes or is considered, thank you, as an internal dimension. But when we start looking at external pieces, marital status, how many people get shamed for being single? Just saying. That's like, it's thrown at your face all the time. That's a dimension of diversity that we don't address. So parental status, women who are being told, if you're not a mom, you're not a woman, that makes no sense. So again, dimension of diversity. And there are many more, and we can start breaking these down. It's a matter of not just recognizing it, but also accepting that they do exist and that it's okay, right? Part of it is that. So an external dimension, as you can see, is geographic location. Now, if you go one step higher, organizational dimensions, you have management status, union affiliation, work, and this, a lot of the times this is around work, who you're with, who you're associated with, so on and so forth. Another second way you could potentially, or you could be an ally, is by paying attention to the people in your circle. Now, your existence in itself is intersectional, from the people around you to the shops around you to companies to everything. It's all intersectional. There are migrants all around. Your job as an ally should be to listen, not just with your ears, but also with your eyes. A lot of the times, migrants go through tons of challenges, and it shows on body and mind. And I've had those conversations on the sidelines of work with other migrants, but we don't really address it in the big with other people. A lot of the times I've had acquaintances say, it doesn't matter to me because it's not something that I go through. I last year went through the entire, I went through an H-1B visa process, and I actually didn't get the visa, and I struggled, and I had to find a job outside of the US because I didn't want to move back. And I've never lived in India. Personal take. But at work, that's not a conversation I can have. It's so much stress, but nobody really addressed it at work. So part of being an ally is to be able to do that, to understand that that's also happening. Talk to them, have those conversations, join Facebook groups if you can, just to understand what's going on. The other thing is, the best way to access a community is by having a part of that community in your team. I cannot stress this enough. If a third person goes and talks to, let's just say a real world example, it's easy for me, an Indian person, to go and talk to another Indian person. It's harder for a different ethnic group or culture or whatever to go and talk to that Indian person and have them open up and actually give you answers. It's not possible. I'm not saying it's not possible. It's going to be more challenging. So accessing the community, the best way to do it is to have them on the team. That is why I push for migrants to get hired. They're automatically included in the design process because they've already brought a lot of this to your team. So in the US, a lot of times the visa issues come in first, and the dreaded question of will you now or in the future require visa sponsorship negates half the people that are going to apply for the job. It is a fact. And to avoid and prevent that, push for more of these migrants to get hired. Maybe that question shouldn't even be asked when being hired, because it already reduces the chances of your access to that community. So the next part of it is be respectful of their time and energy. Now, this is a personal take. In my conversations with podcast guests, sorry, it's the night. It's already on me. Podcast guests, I've spoken about the term sacrifices. And what I found is that in general, migrants tend to give up everything in their life just to make sure they can hold that job, because that job is what tethers them to that country. If they don't have that job, they cannot stay back. So if you're seeing this within your circle, don't be a dick about it. Just be nice, be understanding, and be empathetic to what's happening to the people and to the team. And I guess within your own community, maybe your neighbor. And the last part of this is know what's going on in the world. If there are some political issues, and obviously the Ukraine problem is now, it's not even a problem, it's massive. Problem is a small word for what's happening. understand that there are political climate issues that are taking place and changing. Follow these journeys, follow the conversations that are happening online, listen to people and podcasts that are out there. I'm repping my own podcast for the last couple of things, that being said. But and most importantly, make sure you are talking to your circle about it. Whatever happens, those conversations need to be bigger than what's happening between us right now, and bigger than that as well. So that is a definite yes. And this is something I will say to all the migrants on the call and in this event. Don't be afraid to share your own struggles. We don't talk about it at all. I have never talked about it at all. And the minute I started sharing my conversations, my issues with other people, more people understood and recognized that there's more to the story than just, oh, she's in America. It's not that I'm in America. It's that I'm surviving there and I'm trying. So these conversations need to be more public rather than hidden behind closed doors or on the sidelines or within our community. They need to be shared and talked about with other people. And this is how you yourself can propagate and help grow more allies for ourselves, because clearly there are no immigration laws right now helping that conversation. Now, moving away from a lot of the crazy that we've talked about, right? I'm not saying it's crazy, but I'm saying what we actually came for. Talking about now what we actually came for. And that is, how can you take back everything and utilize this information in, and also these tools and tricks in creating a product that is more inclusive. We are moving into a time where we're now not just talking about accessible design. That is a part of the conversation. We're now moving into inclusive design. And inclusiveness is a matter of being able to address the different dimensions of diversity in your own product, in your own solution. Now, these are some things you can take away. And again, these are also things that I constantly work on and conversations that I have at work myself. First thing, there are so many people who are migrants. 4% of the world's population are migrants, in which case they're in your communities and part of your lives, right? They're also part of your user pool. We don't ask those questions at all. And it's not to say that these questions might change your solution, but these questions might yield different fruit. An example I will say is, I'm right now starting to bring the conversation. I work at Capgemini and I'm consulting at Barclaycard, which is a financial tech institute. I'm in their fintech institution, right? Barclaycard is pretty big. We are just starting to have the conversation of what does it mean to be a resident, and why are only residents users we speak to? This is to say that if you are a resident, you are living and working there. Again, the term and terminology is defined by the government for us, but are we adhering to it when we are allowing these people to open an account? Because that would mean anyone who's moving here to be a student will not be able to open an account, because according to the government definition, it doesn't fall under that, which means we've already lost a significant portion of income. So in this instance, you can be asking questions of understanding who your users are, and basically asking the question around, where were you born? Very simple, because that addresses the concept of, are you foreign born or foreign national? How long have you been living in the city? How many languages do you know? These are just ways to address and find whether a person is a migrant within your user pool or not. And there is a method to this madness, right? There is a reason I'm asking. I'm saying it's good to identify this, because we're not designing solutions that are super long-term. Can we design systems that are temporary, like massive systems that are temporary? Because chances of a migrant staying in a location for a long time is low. Can there be learnings from this community that can be then taken into our solution itself? Bumble is a great example, right? Like, how many times have I re-downloaded and downloaded that stupid app, and constantly, right? And that's not just one person. Another example I'll say is the NJ Transit. I don't go to New York very often, but when I do, I need that app to buy tickets. So how often are we designing massive systems that are temporary instead of looking at it as permanence? And this is something that can be learned by speaking to a migrant, understanding how long are they going to be in a location? What are they going to use it for? And how often are they going to use it? And is there a plan to move in the future that's going to change because that's a lost customer again, or lost user. So are we thinking about temporariness of our solutions? And lastly, this also directly connects to the first point, is using inclusive language. Now, this is super, it sounds stupid, but it's not. Inclusive language and nomenclature is really important. Now, we cannot always be perfect, but can we get to a point where we're constantly learning and developing from this, right? Things to think about is within our own design process, is there terminology that's offensive? And I'll give you an example, is the mute versus sound off. Mute implies you're shutting someone or keeping them quiet. And that's not something that's comfortable. So there was a study with the Native Americans who thought they couldn't use the mute button because it felt like they felt oppressed. Are we thinking about phrases in terms of its historical context, its negative connotations, its stereotypes, so on and so forth? What's actually happening there? And how can we change our own nomenclature from saying mute? And Zoom has it. If I look on top right there, it's there. From instead of addressing these buttons as mute, I can address them now moving forward as sound off, sound on. Video on, video off, just small things. It's the way we speak and what we address, and also the phrases that we use, like hold down the fort. It's again, random phrase, but is that something that's understood everywhere? And I recently had an example of local and what does local mean to someone here, and that's a cultural difference for us. For me, from the US, local meant completely different thing. It felt like a local mom and pop shop, while here local means like within 30-mile radius, which is very different. So something to start considering in your own design process. Moving forward, just moving towards a more inclusive design, just so we can make products that everyone can use, and consider migrants as a factor in your own design and how you address them and how you can be better allies. It's all to say that we're all a part of the community. We are at work, in your family, and more, and we are your user. So considering us is like bringing money back to the table. Thank you. That's all I have, folks.
All right, if everyone could turn sound on And let's give Archie a round of applause. Yay!